Good morning, everybody. It's about 8:30 in the morning here on Wednesday, October 18th, 2023. I'm here in the southern half of the back 20. That's where the cows are today, right now, in the morning. There's some pretty good grass back here. It's not bad. The temperature is 55 degrees. It's cool, but not cold. It's supposed to get up to 79 today. 79 degrees. That's going to be nice. A reprieve against autumn, I guess. Yeah. So I've been looking at the field again, the southern part of the field, and I think, wow, the grass here is pretty thick. Oh my goodness. I think, I surmise, I estimate, I pontificate. I think that I might be able to continue the rotation on Friday morning. Oh man, there's lots of good grass back here. Yeah, the guy definitely shredded back here. There's no way. There's no way all those weeds just disappeared. Yeah, beautiful. We had tons of ragweed last time I was back here. Now it's all shredded. So, anyway, beautiful Wednesday morning. Beautiful, beautiful. Let's take a look at this whole area here. What is that cow doing? I've seen cows rub in the dirt before, but this is like rubbing in the dirt against a bank. Maybe she just really has a bad itch. There's lots of trees to itch on. So maybe she just wants some dirt in her coat there. You know? Maybe it's fly protection or something. Kind of like elephants do. I was thinking a lot about this lately. And one of the things they used to accuse Christians of doing back in the 80s was indoctrinating the children. And I've always found that a curious accusation. What are you supposed to teach the kids if you don't teach them anything? You know? There was this idea that there was like a natural learning or something the kids would learn through play. The high school that I went to back in the 60s and 70s, I think it was an open high school where kids were free to come and go and take classes. And of course that was a complete disaster. The idea that we're indoctrinating our kids and that's somehow something evil has always surprised me. I mean, shouldn't you teach your kids like how to be successful in life, how to at least continue what your ancestors have built? Why would you want to break that chain? I can think of some examples of why you want to break that chain. If you've had horrible failure, right? Then you want to have your kids learn different than you. But back in the 80s, that just wasn't the case, right? If anything, we should have been indoctrinating our kids even more and more emphatically. The idea really wasn't that you were indoctrinating the kids. It was you were indoctrinating the kids with ideas that we don't like. That was what they were complaining about. So much of what we know, and I use air quotes for the word know, so much of what we know, we actually do not know. We were told is true, and we just accepted it. And if you question the truth of the things you're told, then you're some kind of heretic. And I use the word heretic because that's the terminology that we used in Christianity. In modern day, they call you a science denier. You deny the science. The only people running around calling other people science deniers are people who can't do science. They never could cut it in the classroom. They certainly couldn't cut it in the laboratory. I'll give you an example. There was a there was a comedy show back in the 90s in the Seattle area called Almost Live. And there was a guest that would appear every once in a while. He was a quirky sort of fellow. He'd put on I think he had broken glasses, like taped glasses, and a lab coat. And he would design these wonderfully complex experiments to demonstrate some kind of scientific principle. And the experiments would always go horribly wrong. And it was funny. We could laugh at him. Laugh at the geek, Nerds are funny, right? And it was a comedy routine, right? It was pretty funny. It really wasn't that funny, but it was, for local comedy, it was pretty funny, This guy, he became a sort of celebrity. I don't know how it happened. I really don't. But he ended up on public television. For those of you not from the U.S., public television is TV that is just not as good as the other TV. It's funded by the quote-unquote public. It's really paid by the government. And it's supposed to be like educational material. And so they'd make all these programs that nobody wanted to pay for. And so public TV, and he had a show where he called himself the Science Guy. You know who I'm talking about now, Bill Nye the Science Guy. And the show's format was roughly, he would tell you something that scientists have concluded and say, that's science, Water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit because that's science, Things like that. And I've never really liked the format of the show. I didn't really understand why I didn't like it as a kid. But as I became an adult and I started going to college classes and studying actual physics, I realized that there were two types of students: the ones that watched all the science shows on TV and the ones like myself that didn't. I never really was interested in the science shows. They seemed incredibly fake to me. And I was correct. Almost everything you see on a science show is wrong, one way or the other. And the biggest problem with the science shows is they always show you they show you the result. They show you what scientists have concluded. They never show you like how those results were obtained. Sometimes they give you like kind of a pretty view of how things happen, but they tend to gloss over the fact that 99% of the time scientists were wrong, but we're absolutely certain they're right about what we know today, right? And I've always loved the idea that we should trust scientists because scientists are right, when there's nothing more laughable than to claim that scientists are right. Science history is one giant junkyard, trash heap of bad ideas that have been disproven, and bad methods. And it's a demonstration of why we can't trust scientists and why we shouldn't trust scientists, and why our instant reaction to hearing anything that a scientist claims should be, I don't think that's correct, right? And I can't put my finger on why. I just know that it's not correct, and you'd be right. You'd be right. To give you an example, the mass charge ratio of the electron was first measured, and it was such and such a number. And I forget whether it was too high or too low. Let's just say it was too high, right? So they were off by quite a bit. And by quite a bit, I don't mean like, a couple decimal points. I mean like 20%. They were 20% too big compared to the modern standard. Well, somebody else did another kind of experiment to determine the mass to charge ratio of the electron. And they got very close to the right answer. But because it was so far off from the original experiment, they got shy, and they instead kind of doctored the results and, just change that 6 to a 7 over there and that 2 to a 3. And next thing you know, they have a number that's very close to the original number that was observed, but it's still wrong, And somebody else did another kind of experiment, and it showed the correct value, but he too, because of social pressure, you can't doubt science, right? Science is right. He published a paper that was also wrong. And it actually took a long time before physicists were brave enough to question the original experiment. And eventually they got it closer to what we think it is today, right? And going back and saying, why did you guys all get it wrong? It was clear the answer was because they weren't doing science, they were doing politics. They were more concerned about what other people thought of their work than they were about the correctness of the work. And the moral of the story is that if you let politics into science, if you allow it to be a popularity game, then you are no longer doing science. So, unfortunately, that's a lesson that we have been learning over and over again throughout history, and even today. Even today, when you mix politics and science, you're not doing science anymore, you're doing politics. They don't mix, right? So, to go back to the original point, back in the 80s, we were told that we were indoctrinating our kids. We Christians were brainwashing them, right? I remember reading an article, I forget what document it was in, but the guy's point was that somehow the low bass tones of the organs in the church were causing some kind of hypnotic effect that was allowing the suggestion to be implanted, about religion. And that was how churches were actually so successful at persuading people to do church things. And it had nothing to do with the message itself. Oh no, it's the low bass tones of the organ causing a hypnotic effect, right? And I remember thinking, even back then, I'm like, well, Jesus didn't have an organ, right? Maybe he just had a really low voice. Anyway, so much of what you know is not true because you're told to accept it based on the authority of the person who said it. And that is not science, that is politics. That's religion. That's not even a religion, right? It's politics, because whoever's currently in power gets to determine what is true, what's allowed to be said. Oh, man. I just, I used to think that most people understood why that's such a bad thing, but, we're living in a society today in the 2020s, where if you question certain things that should be questioned, you're just a denier, you're a Nazi, you're some kind of evil, whatever, a hate speech, blah, 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 It didn't used to be this way. It really did not. Back in the 80s, oh man, you can say or do anything and you get away with it. People were doing all sorts of nasty stuff to each other. Stuff that's very much unaccepted today. And we thought nothing of it. Oh, man. Anyway. Okay, my point is this. This is kind of the central point, central thesis. Atheism is a new philosophy that stole ideas from Christianity and represented them as if they came up with those ideas on their own. Atheism is a fraud and a sham. The idea that there is no God is a completely novel, modern concept not found in history, because even back then they realized how absurd such an idea was. Like in the pre-modern science days, they can look at a statement like there is no God and just laugh at it because of course it's wrong. Why would anybody ever think such a thing? Clearly the person's mentally befuddled if they claim that there is no God. And that's one of the charges they put against Socrates on his trial, was that Socrates was an atheist or believed that there was no God, God or gods, right? And how far we've come, right? How far we've come, right? Just the mere accusation of not believing in God was enough to completely discredit a man as lunatic, right? And why was that? Why were people so adamant that of course there were gods or God? Well, we live in a world today, so much of what you think you know is not so. And so much of what you see is shaped by what you think you know, right? And so you look around the world and you say, well, how could it possibly be that the ancient men would say that atheists are deluded or insane? Obviously, right? How can that be? And we don't see it because we're taught not to see it. We're taught to ignore it. We're taught to question the thing that, is obviously cannot be questioned, right? So what is it that we're not seeing? Like, we're in the woods, but we can't see the trees. What are the trees, right? I'm going to tell you right now the true history of modern science, what actually happened, how it came to be. Okay, a long time ago, before Christ, there were people that thought that the world was ordered, that there was some kind of rules about how the world worked, okay? And these guys had very primitive thoughts that if you heard them today, you'd probably say like, oh, that's something a caveman would come up with. Yes, people were living in caves back then. It was actually a fairly good place to live, right? It's a good arrangement to live in a cave. Anyways, but these people, they came up with ideas, and the concepts were very different from each other, but roughly the concept that seemed to take hold was that the universe was composed of something, and that something behaved a certain way, and that we could understand how those things behaved, right? That was the fundamental concept that started it all, okay? And why the universe behaved that way, nobody was really sure. They didn't really even have an answer for how the universe behaved. They just had the idea that it did, right? Now, over time, the great search has been for understanding those rules for how things behave. Like, what exactly, like, does matter have free will? Does matter have emotions? Does matter respond to, like, what is matter? Does the matter even exist, right? These are pretty important questions, okay? Now, Christianity entered into the scene, okay? And to understand what Christianity really is, you have to go to the central figure in Christianity, which is Christ himself, okay? You have to go and you have to read what he said. You have to read what he did, okay? Now, when Christ came to the earth, he reset humanity's understanding of the world. He changed everything about the dynamic between man and nature, okay? You can't just go around raising people from the dead and not change, like, how people think about the world, okay? So Christ taught some central ideas that are the foundation for modern science. They laid the seeds for it, okay? I'm going to try to be quick on this. One of the central ideas is that there is a God who is the master of all. Like, everything does what he wants, okay? The next concept that he gave was that God, and we have to get into the concept of the Trinity, which I really don't want to get into, but basically he said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, okay? And if you're not steeped in biblical culture and history, those statements seem really weird, but basically what he was saying is, he's saying, I am the universe, I am everything, okay? I'm not just some guy, right? And we read later that Paul correctly identified the importance of his statements. Paul identified that because of Jesus, everything exists. Okay? So Jesus is existence. They're one and the same. Okay? The early Christians started down the path of science because they realized that nature itself isn't a separate entity from God, but it is God. Okay? That when you go outdoors and you see the beauty of nature, you're not just looking at molecules and atoms and chemicals. You're looking at God. You're looking inside of his mind. You're looking inside of his will. He wants the universe to be this way. Okay? And so when you study anything in the universe, you're not just studying the thing in the universe, you're studying God. Okay, so to these early Christians, the study of science was the study of God. There was no difference. Okay, now they started to combine with the ideas of the Greeks about how nature actually works. And some of those combinations were pretty silly. They didn't fly, but some of them started to make some sense. And Aristotle was probably the guy that made the most sense to the early Christians. And the Renaissance was really a rediscovery of these ancient Greek writings, and then taking those writings in the context of Christianity. That's the key, right? Because we've always had those writings as humanity. We've had them for a very long time. But it wasn't until we took them in the context of Christianity that things started to really make sense, okay? The long and the short of it is that people like Isaac Newton existed, okay? Isaac Newton wrote more about his attempts to understand Revelation, the book of Revelation, than he did about physics and mathematics. That was what consumed him. That was his passion. In fact, I think he studied physics and mathematics and the motion of the stars because he wanted to better understand Revelation. He was a Christian first, right? He was a philosopher second. And you go back to all of these guys. You go back to Descartes, right? Descartes was a Christian first. He was a philosopher, mathematician second, okay? And so their pursuit of knowledge was not the pursuit of knowledge. It was the pursuit of God. They wanted to understand God better. They wanted to understand how to be a better person, okay? And that's the key that you're missing, okay? Now, atheists say, this is the story the atheists want you to believe, is that the universe existed somehow. We don't really understand that part. The universe comports with laws. Somehow, we don't really understand that part either. And we should go out there and try to understand these laws for some reason that nobody really understands, right? And they might say, well, you can have a better life. You can feed the hungry, which I guess is a good thing. Like, why is that a good thing? The atheists never really have an answer for that question. Why is something good? Why is it good to be nice to people? Well, Christianities have the answer. It's really easy because Christ said so, right? He said, if you take care of the weak things, you're really taking care of me, right? If you visit the lonely and feed the sick, or feed the hungry and tend to the sick and all that kind of stuff, you're really helping me, right? And so Christians know, like, that when they're helping the little people, when they're doing things like that, they're actually serving Christ. So of course Christians want to have an answer to, like, how do we feed the hungry? How can we make more crops? How can we make more of this? How can we make more of that? That's, to them, that's a religious duty to figure those things out. To an atheist, what is it? It's like, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me, right? Atheists have no answer for those questions. They have no reasons. So atheists 100% stole modern science from the Christians. And then they turned around and said, you Christians, you are so stupid, right? You never invented this thing, we did. Which is silly, right? There were no atheists at the start of modern science. The people who started it were by no stretch of the imagination even closely to becoming an atheist, right? And then the other thing they did is they took our morality from us. They said that it's good to help poor people. It's good to be nice to people. No, at no time in the history of the planet has anybody ever said such a thing, right? The only place you'll find any kind of message like that is in the Bible, okay? And they've somehow taken that message from Christianity and then turned it around to Christians and say, you're such a terrible person because you're not helping poor people. It's ridiculous. It's a complete inverse and reversal, okay? So what you're taught as a kid, you were taught in public schools, if you're an American, and specifically they excluded from your curriculum anything to do with Christianity. If it had anything good to say about Christianity, it was taken out of the textbooks, right? If it was any defense of Christianity, it was taken out of the textbooks. You were taught to deny Christ. You were taught to look at the universe, see evidence of God, and say there is no God. Okay, that's what you were taught from a very young age. Such a backwards teaching, right? And then you were taught to worship man and his infinite wisdom. You were taught that man knows best and that we should trust the philosophies of men, when the early scientists rejected man, rejected the philosophies of men, and instead embraced nature. Okay, that's kind of where I wanted to go with that. You have been indoctrinated to reject Christ, and you have been indoctrinated to elevate man above his station. And oh, what a world we live in now, right? all of the problems in the world are easily traced back to those two teachings, that we reject God and we embrace man. What a horrible concept that is. Like, put your trust in man. No, thank you. I want no part in that. I know what I'm like as a person. I don't trust myself. Why would I trust another person? You know? No, the only thing worthy of your trust and faith is God. And when you do that, when you put your faith and trust in him, the blessings are infinite. You know, modern science is just one of the many blessings that we've obtained through our faith in Jesus Christ. That's something to think about. It really is. Go read the Bible, seriously. If you haven't, study it again. Have a great day. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.